Good day, everyone. My name is David Williams, Executive Director of the International Association for Energy Economics. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Embedded Generation and Future Electricity Systems of the Global South. We are grateful to the South African Association for Energy Economics for today's timely discussion. First, a little bit about the International Association for Energy Economics. We are the largest association specializing in the field of energy economics and provide a forum for the exchange of ideas, experience, and issues among professionals interested in the field. The organization produces 2 professional journals, a newsletter, and holds conferences and virtual presentations, along with a host of other products and services that you can find at our website at www.iaee.org. If you're not already a member of the association, we welcome you to join. A few housekeeping matters in regard to today's webinar before I hand things over to our moderator. First, this webinar is being recorded for those that cannot participate in today's live event. If you have questions for our panelists, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window and type your question. We've allocated sufficient time at the end of this webinar to address your questions. And now I would like to introduce you to our moderator, Dr. Roula Inglesi-Lotz, Professor in the Department of Economics at the University of Pretoria. Roula is also the president of SAAEE and is a council member of the International Association for Energy Economics. Roula, over to you.
Thank you, David. Good day, good afternoon to everyone, depending when you are in the world. Thank you to David for the introduction, and thank you to the International Association for Energy Economics that is hosting today's discussion, that is organized by the South African Association for Energy Economics. So, as David said, I'm Roula Inglesi-Lotz. I'm the president of the South African Association for Energy Economics, and the vice president of membership and regional relations of the IEE. So today, our speakers will deal with a very interesting topic of embedded generation, with particular focus on the potential it has to make drastic changes in the sector in the global south. The revolutionary decline in the economies of scale in power generation in recent years has brought about a growing international trend to develop enabling policy and regulatory dispensations for embedded generation so that they can supplement national grids. Within this context, embedded generation can be described as the small-scale production of power located close to the place of consumption, but also when we are able to sell electricity into the distribution network, the whole idea of consumers turning into prosumers. Embedded generation has the potential to reduce electricity demand from the grid. We heard very recently the South African president announced that the self-generation threshold would be raised to 100 megawatts, for example, and simultaneously it can improve prosumers' environmental position. Such a decentralized approach is supported by some policymakers to assist with concerns about security of supply. An appropriate regulatory and policy dispensation for embedded generation is crucial, thus, for it to make it a successful contribution to the often overburdened systems, particularly in countries of the global south. So today's discussion aims at introducing various perspectives, geographic, policy, economic, technological, while exploring the question of whether embedded generation would provide a much needed solution to environmentally sustainable electricity systems, and also whether such a solution is better suited to certain countries rather than others. We're discussing the whole idea of global south today. So enough from my side. I will start by introducing our panelists and ask each of them to share with us their thoughts, their experience, their perspectives with a bit of information for the development of embedded generation in their country or the region. So I will start firstly with welcoming Prof. Ricardo Raineri, a very good friend of SAE. Ricardo Raineri is a past president of the International Association for Energy Economics, former Chilean energy minister and chairman of the board of the Chilean State Oil Company, former alternative executive director of the World Bank Group, professor of the engineering school at Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, and economic advisor of associated universities. He is an economist with a vast professional experience in the energy sector and institutional issues on the economics of regulation and antitrust policy, market structure, business strategy, and corporate governance. He has published in various academic and professional journals and regularly consults for the public sector and private companies. He holds a bachelor's in economics, business engineer professional degree, and a master's in economics degree from the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, and a master of arts and doctor of philosophy, both in economics from the University of Minnesota. So Ricardo, over to you. Thank you for your for sharing your thoughts and opinions with us.
Thank you, Roula. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this interesting panel to the South African Association for Energy Economics and the International Association for Energy Economics. This is a very interesting subject. I will start saying that this is a very interesting year on energy discussion. We have been living a complex couple of years with COVID, but I think this is an interesting year for energy discussion. The Secretary General of the United Nations is hosting a high-level dialogue on energy in September of this year that they have been working for a long time to speed up Sustainable Development Goal number 7 related with energy, and also to speed up commitment for the Paris Agreement. If we look in terms of Sustainable Development Goals number 7, universal access to energy, renewable energy, energy efficiency, certainly we see that there is important challenges there. Today we have about 100 million people without access to electricity, or 2.6 billion without access to modern cooking facilities. And certainly we need to do a lot more to reach the Paris Agreement goals and net neutrality of CO2 emission by 2050. If we move in the same way we have been moving the last years, we will not be able to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 7.1 of universal access to electricity by 2030. So there is a big challenge how we can speed that up. So the high-level dialogue focused on 5 different themes: energy access, energy transition, energy action to advance other sustainable development goals, capacity building, and finance and investment. So when we talk about energy transition and the opportunities for distributed generation, we have to look at some different realities that we face in the world. If we look at developed and high-income countries where most energy use, energy transition opportunities for distributed generation in general are oriented toward replacing current infrastructure, energy savings. But when we look at middle and low-income countries, we find a situation where many rely on subsistence level of consumption, not just on energy. And energy access is a key challenge. If we look sub-Saharan Africa, we still have a big gap in terms of energy access, less than 50% of population. We see similar situations in some region of Asia, Latin America, and also we find that there's a lot of lack of infrastructure for household and industry consumption of energy. So the focus in middle and low-income countries, instead of replacing current infrastructure, must be on how we can provide energy and increase output with building in a much better way. So with, let's say, energy efficiency. And some challenge there certainly is access to finance and how we can enhance institutional workforce and knowledge capabilities. So as you already mentioned, embedded generation or distributed generation in general is a small-scale generating units located near to consumption areas, and that make a big change in how energy system operate, because it's matched the concept of unidirectional energy flows. Okay, so with embedded generation, we start seeing that energy move in one or other direction depending on how this is working. So what are the opportunities in terms of the uses that we have for distributed generation? And certainly that depends a lot on the local context. Well, first, certainly the customers can continually generate their own electricity with or without grid reservation. And they can reduce the quantity of energy purchased from the grid during peak price periods. If they had license, they can sell excess of energy back to the grid. It can be used as backup or emergency power. It has an important role in improving the quality and reliability of electric grids. And also it can be a place for applications such as green energy and remote energy. That is something that is very important when we look to the challenges of energy access in remote areas. And it can meet continuous energy or cogeneration need of the residential commercial market. So there are a lot of opportunities, and if we look at what has happened in the last years to energy costs of different technologies, we see a huge reduction. If we look the last IRENA Renewable Power Generation Cost 2020 report, the utility scale solar PV plants have decreased their cost by 85% in the last decade. In residential PV, the declining costs have been between 49 and 82%, depending on the region. And on onshore wind, we see a declining cost of 56%. So if we look those numbers and also making reference to the International Energy Agency projected cost of generating electricity, we see that these renewable energy sources are becoming very competitive with traditional source of energy, and in some part they have become even cheaper than some of those. But what still remains as a more expensive source of energy is the residential, for example, PV systems that are still more expensive than a commercial PV plant or a utility scale PV plant. So unsubsidized standalone residential systems are still not profitable for in general large cities, but they are eventually a good solution or profitable for remote isolated areas. How we have been moving forward in terms of promoting distributed generation laws. Well, if we look REN 21, Renewables 2021 Growth Status Report, we see that low-income countries, 1 in 21 of countries has net metering or net billing policies. If we look high-income countries, that go up to 30 in 62 countries. So there is a big gap between developing countries and developed countries in terms of how they have advanced institutional frameworks to promote distributed generation. And certainly we have to be careful there in terms that when we talk about net metering, net billing policies, for example, to promote distributed generation, well, we are talking in a high-income country, a situation where you have infrastructure and you are replacing or putting some other infrastructure that compete with the existing infrastructure. If we look developing countries where energy access is a big challenge, net metering, net billing policies maybe will not make too much sense while you don't have the energy infrastructure that is needed. So what are barriers that we see for the further deployment of distributed generation? Certainly asymmetric or lack of information. We are working with, I will call it, an experience good. There is certainly some uncertainties how these systems will work, how reliable there are. Also, there is a big challenge with upfront cost. You need to put an investment there, and if we don't have a proper capital market, proper business model for the people, certainly it becomes very complex to finance those investments. And also we see a challenge in terms of the authorities' commitment with clear plan targets to promote distributed generation. So I would say that the main challenge is in policy. Policy is key for the promotion of distributed generation. We need to build capacity, knowledge, norm, codes for these energy sources, and the government needs to set a comprehensive distributed generation program that is suited for the realities of each country. And finally, underscore again the challenge of access to finance and a proper business model to promote these new sources of energy. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you. I think you started painting the picture around the positives and the negatives of embedded generation, the challenges and the opportunities that we are facing. And also by mentioning some of these things, you stress, you illustrate quite a lot the difference between, I don't like the term developing, so I'm going to say that the more industrialized with the less industrialized world, the countries of the global north, like it's commonly called, and the global south. So I'm going to go next to our next panelist. I would like to welcome Swetha, RaviKumar, Bhagwat. Sorry, I should have apologized beforehand for all the butchering of surnames. Swetha is the head of FSR Global at the Florence School of Regulation. She's responsible for the institution's global initiative that develops research, training, and policy dialogue with the countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, while being passionate about emerging energy technologies like electric vehicles, green hydrogen, and smart grids. She also heads the FSR's program on universal access to energy, which provides research and training in energy regulation related to energy access. In the past, she has worked at the Dutch Development Bank, Fraunhofer ISE, as well as Indian organizations dedicated to technology, industry, and research promotion. Thank you, Swetha. We can't hear you yet. No, we lost Swetha. Let's give it a few seconds to see if she will connect again. Let's be back.
Thanks, Roula. Sorry.
Yes,
just
not
at the
a
time
problem.
when you have to speak, your intercom starts buzzing.
It's bound to happen. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that lovely introduction and for inviting me on this panel. It gives me an absolute pleasure to be with one of the counterparts, given that I also represent the board of the Indian Association of Energy Economics. Thanks to David. So what I'll do is take the next few minutes to give you an overview of where India stands when it comes to distributed energy resources and what they have been doing so far, and where is it that we see there's more scope for us to improve upon when we look at policy and regulatory space in this context. So just to give you a bit of background, India's installed capacity is in the order of about 383 gigawatts, of which there is almost half of it, which is close to 47%, where private sector plays a very active role. And within the energy mix, we have about 25% of renewable energy resources. So we are ticking the box in terms of some of the checklist that's needed for us to sort of man this energy transition. But given our energy security concerns and also the climate goals, what the country has done in the recent years, or preferably more in the last decade, is to come up with more ambitious targeted plans. And one such plan that's driving the distributed energy space is the national RE targets, keeping the year 2022 in mind, of which about 175 gigawatts was to be installed using renewable energy resources. Now here, what the government has done is sort of given a direction on two fronts. About 100 gigawatts is parked for providing solar-based technologies. It could be either at the small scale or large scale, but and then about 40 gigawatts is dedicated specifically for rooftop and off-grid solutions. Now, in order to realize this dream, the kind of investments that's pouring in is about $2 billion USD per year, but the order of investments that's required to realize this dream is about 18 billion. So we are far from really sort of opening up and getting that kind of active participation to meet our targets. So now coming to the question of where are all of these distributed renewable energy resources being parked around the country? So India is quite a vast country, and we have two layers of administration. So we have the federal or the central government, which has these macro policies, and then the state governments can sort of adopt and modify it to sort of feed into this. So you have two layers of policy space that's sort of dictating how these things work out in the country. And we're pretty much like the European Union in comparison, where the coordination happens. So on the Indian front, a lot of work has been happening on the rural side. Actually, that's where it started, particularly in the agriculture sector. The very first policy interventions and also the success programs have happened in the agriculture pumping sector, particularly. Then over the last years, along with the East African region, India was one of the more popular ones where off-grid solutions were really taking off. When I say off-grid, it was more on the solar home systems and lantern space. And in the recent years, things have switched more towards mini grids. All of this focused around the energy access policy and on providing access to the population that lacked. In the recent years, India claims to have achieved about 100% electrification. That's purely in terms of the connectivity, but not in terms of the reliability. So we're far from actually providing access as and when the consumer needs it. So in terms of improving reliability, we see that there is more distributed energy resources and different business models that are playing out, at least in the rural sector. So there's a lot of work happening there. Now coming to the cities or in the semi-urban pockets, we see more of solar rooftop policy taking on a primary role. And also in the CNI customer segment, we see more captive power plants. Again, that goes back to the reliability question, where loss of business is much more. So CNI customers end up installing their own. And given that so renewable energy, particularly solar, is more price lucrative, people do have their own plants to run their stuff. And also we see in cities or in slightly crowded population, also the RESCO model, so which is sort of gaining momentum. Now, to the business as usual scenarios, we also have in India energy storage coming in, electric vehicles. There's a huge push keeping the pollution and the heat that I was talking about. To keep all of these changes in mind, there's an ambitious drive to sort of push for energy storage and electric vehicles, particularly backed again by clean energy generation, and also to sort of increase the productive use of non-agriculture based appliances. So there is the need to increase the demand overall. So, and also we have seen the emergence of newer concepts such as sector coupling coming in. And right now, one of the topics that's sort of gaining interest is also green hydrogen. So we see that renewable-based DREs particularly have a very important role to play on the different layers of energy demand in the country, and with different kinds of consumers and consumer segments, they have different kinds of business models that could emerge. So, so these are the, of course, specific policies that are dictating in India, but we also have cross-cutting policies that sort of tie in a couple of these things, which sort of make it more interesting in the case of India. Particularly, we have the smart cities and the smart grid initiatives. So India has picked about 100 cities, which would sort of tie in various policies going beyond energy, of course, going into mobility, health, and all of these other aspects, but which sort of gives a platform for institutions or the authorities to sort of bring all this together. Else, in terms of execution of these different policies, usually different ministries doing different things. And you can see how things in silos need not totally help us realize our goals. So what essentially these policies are trying to do is sort of bring all of them into one framework and trying to sort of make the benefits available both to the consumer in terms of options and prices, and also for the business community in terms of business proposition, because there's a lot more scope for service providers to come in, and also new business models for the existing distribution companies, which are looking for new revenue cash flows to come in. So where do we stand in terms of implementing all of this today in India? On the rooftop policy front, although we have had this policy guiding us for over a decade, much less has been realized in this policy, because there was feed-in tariff, there was net metering implemented, but not implemented robustly enough for residential consumers in urban cities to pick it up. And CNI consumers are not part of this policy within the urban sector, so they are they fall under different brackets. So just coordination amongst different policy is sort of stopping or impeding the realization of the targets of this very policy. So there itself lies one of the solutions of how to have two different departments talking to each other. In terms of storage, we see that there is demo projects coming in, particularly with also drop in the prices of batteries. There seems to be consideration by the government on how to have a proper policy mandate guiding what businesses could do, particularly storage at the distribution level, and also looking at beyond that, and looking at large-scale storage integration as well. Then we also, of course, have smart grids. Again, smart grids is not taking place uniformly across the country. Some states are more proactive than the other. Although most of it right now is limited to having charging infrastructure in terms of electric vehicles, or smart meters in terms of at the distribution grid. Of course, how smart, what it can do is a subjective question. That is what the country and the experts are debating, because you need to be smart enough to unlock the business proposition for that area. But if it needs to be more smart, that means you're increasing the cost. So how smart is good for an Indian consumer base? Because the ones who can afford probably wouldn't want that kind of benefits, and the ones who cannot afford would anyway not subscribe to it in the first place. So there are these different social aspects also to consider when you're looking at the Indian population, and driving all of this is also where governments are considering more time of use or dynamic tariffs coming in. And also in the future, hopefully, aggregators coming in, bringing all of these different services, electric vehicles, storage, all of them under, and sort of giving value to the consumer at the end of the day. So we're still far from there because India is still sort of in the process of unlocking distribution and retail. So it's still combined. And given that the crux of this entire matter goes back to what Professor Ricardo said, also the health of distribution companies. And in India, not all distribution companies are doing that well. In terms of managing our technical losses, probably we're doing fine, but there is still a lot to go from in terms of billing and collection and revenue collection, and also fighting the subsidized tariff policies that do come in from the political and social space. On the large scale, RE integration, although not part of this, does have an impact on the policy of distribution, because a lot of people who have money park it in large RE. And there too, there is a lot of sort of curtailment in taking on, because still we have old school legacy PPAs dictating which technologies are taken in. And we're still moving to we're still only 10% into the open market. So there's still a long way to go in terms of opening up the market for the players. And also the low prices of solar panels that crashed the market in India has never gone a course correction. So now government is used to seeing an artificially lowered price, but is not ready to sort of, again, adjust back. So that doesn't encourage more investments to come in, because there is no business proposition there. So it's sort of in a locked position now. And if even at the large scale lucrative businesses don't see the light of day, then there is still less scope in the distribution. So that's where India stands right now in terms of the complexities. And as you can see, there is a lot of interest and intent to do it. And they do have, they are considering the net zero concept, given that's going to be a central theme around the COP this year. And also looking at how to sort of transition in a smarter way by not repeating the mistakes that the other countries had to do. So to learning from there, that's where we are. So India still miles to go, but I think it has all tapped into all the right policy cells, but it all depends on how we sort of tie it in and realize it as a country. So that's where India stands, and I'll be happy to now listen to what the other panelists have to say about their experiences.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think Swetha managed to take what Ricardo said and take it to the next step with looking at sectoral policies. We heard about the agriculture. We heard about cross-cutting policies that are necessary. Again, the issue of technology came about. The willingness, but not necessarily the capacity to do it, which we might hear now from the African continent side as well. That's my personal feeling from the African continent side as well. So let me take you all from India now. Let's travel to the African continent. I would like to introduce to all of you Mr. John Uwajumogu. He is presently a partner with the Strategy and Transactions Subservice at EY West Africa, where he plays a dual role as the energy and infrastructure leader across the region. He has over 21 years of experience providing financial advisory service on mandates ranging from project and infrastructure finance, transaction structuring, mergers and acquisitions, divestitures, financial modeling, and valuations for corporates and a range of institutional investors. He has been involved in assignments in various sectors such as energy, oil and gas, mining, infrastructure, and government. He has vast experience working in the key energy markets in Houston, Calgary, and Lagos, and has advised on over 200 transactions. John is a certified public accountant and a graduate of the Fletcher School, Tufts University. Welcome, John. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Roula, and thank you to the association for this invitation, and good day to everyone, wherever you are in the world. This is a topic, a very important topic, which has strong imperatives for the future of energy market in our region. And as Swetha was speaking, some of the things that the comments that she made and the points she alluded to really resonates, because it's almost Nigeria, it's almost like she's talking about Nigeria as the trajectory that they've gone and some of the obstacles that they've confronted and some of the policies that they've tried to put in play to try to stimulate the growth of this industry. In the Nigerian context, we operate a single buyer model in the grid space. And what that means then is that generation capacity is centrally procured and distributed through 11 distribution utilities. And the entire industry, while it is privatized with significant minority government equity holdings, it's highly regulated in the capacities that are generation capacities that are acquired, the type of technology that is acquired, the tariff that is set. And this has strong implication in the current status of the industry, because with the strong regulation, it has actually resulted in very limited supply and very strong challenges, particularly in downstream space, where similar to India, we're experiencing high levels of collection loss and commercial loss, and with issues around whether the tariff is market reflective. And that has also impacted the ability of the local distribution utilities to finance required upgrades or make investments in maintaining the integrity of their networks. And given that we run this regulated single buyer, single supplier model, whatever happens downstream ultimately reverberates upstream. So the industry is locked into mutual dependencies, if you will, and sometimes that results in misaligned interest and misaligned risk, because the decisions that are made downstream ultimately impact other players in the sector. So with that, we've experienced really years of inefficiency of the grid. To put this in context, about 50% of Nigeria's population, which is about 100 million people, do not have access to grid electricity. And for a population of 200 million people, we only get the grid distributes, or we generate and distribute about 7,000 megawatts of power. So you can imagine how, in terms of per capita consumption of energy, it's really low when compared to peer countries, and even countries that are of a lower economic strata than Nigeria. We actually, it's a level of underperformance that it's quite acute. So, not surprisingly, this level of grid, I would say grid unreliability, really is the main driver for migration of the grid into the off-grid space. And I think when we think of embedded generation being part of the energy system of the future, how this off-grid space is being integrated into the existing networks is going to be very key. Over the last 10 years, we've seen huge proliferation in off-grid capacity. Where we are now, about 86% of Nigerian businesses generate or purchase their energy needs through off-grid sources. And even on an individual or household level, the same number also prevails. And so it's not surprising that investments have also, it has animated the interest of investors who have followed this migration. And we're in a situation where there are more investment flow into the off-grid space than there are in the on-grid space. So further exacerbating the situations that exist in the off-grid. To give an example, the last major investment in the grid space was the 450 megawatts Azuraido power plant, which was the first project financed IPP in Nigeria, was quite celebrated and was supposed to usher in new developments of that nature. But since then, which the Azuraido came online 5 to 6 years ago, we've not seen any additional investments of that scale. And that just illustrates the problems that exist in the grid space, because the liquidity issues, the high level of losses have just stifled investment going in there. But on the other hand, in the off-grid space, we've seen lots of investments. Now, most of these capacities are being grown in a very fragmented manner. And also, while it helps, particularly for the commercial and industrial customers, while it helps in improving reliability of supply, it comes at a much more expensive financial and also as well as environmental costs. We're in a situation right now where Nigerians pay double the tariff for what obtains from the grid, and also much more significantly than what obtains in some of its peer countries, using Ghana or South Africa, for example. So this is making Nigerian producers very not competitive, and they put that in the context of the competitiveness of the economy, in the context of the Africa Free Trade Agreement coming into force. And when that's fully implemented, it just shows what sort of obstacle that represents for Nigeria's industrialization and being a manufacturing base to compete effectively in the Africa Free Trade Agreement. And also on the environmental side, most of the fuels that are being used to satisfy these energy needs comes from high carbon emission petroleum products. So mostly has been through diesel and fuel oil. Has been historically have been the fuel of choice. But on the flip side, there's been some progress, as given Nigeria's, I would say, large endowment of natural gas and investments going into the off-grid space, as well as maturing technologies in logistics and in logistics, especially as it relates to natural gas, and also in renewable technologies. We're seeing increased incorporation of renewable energy and in natural gas into the off-grid space. We're seeing the development of what's called virtual pipelines, whereby natural gas is being containerized and brought into the commercial space. This is largely targeting commercial and industrial clients at this point. brought into the commercial space, and now we're seeing increased displacement of diesel as well as of fuel oil as the primary base fuel for all this off-grid generation capacity. And that also has additional beneficial effect because, particularly as it relates to natural gas, because as these investments go into the off-grid space and sprawling further investment along the value chain, we are seeing reduction in gas flaring in Nigeria as increasingly those flare sites are now being commercialized and the gas is being commercialized into serving the large electricity market that exists. So, and in addition to that, with, as alluded by the professor and Swetha as well, with the falling costs or maturing technology of solar, we're seeing incorporation of solar in particular. I started out first in the residential and household space with solar home systems and inverter systems beginning to replace diesel generators and petrol generators. But now we're seeing its entrance in the commercial space as well. And we've seen investments in companies that provide power as a service, where, I mean, most of them right now are using a hybrid system of natural gas and solar. But it's positive that we're seeing a lot of this happening. That companies like Daystar Power and Starsight Power are really making inroads in this space by incorporating solar and natural gas. And we're seeing, obviously, with a beneficial impact from an environmental standpoint. So, and
John, let me be the rude one here and interrupt you. I'm fascinated, so I'm trying to say one more sentence. Let him say one more sentence because what he's saying is crucial. But I don't want to waste. I don't want to take time from Xolile that she can finish. She can finish the round of the remarks from all the panelists. Thank you very much for your contribution. It's really exciting to hear what's happening, and you brought the element a little bit of underperformance or insecurity of the existing grids and how that is an opportunity for the new technologies to exist. So thank you very much for taking the perspective from that side. I'm going to move on to Xolile. Ms. Xolile Msimanga from South Africa. She's a senior researcher at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, SIR Energy Center, and she's also a board member of the South African Energy Association, NPC, SANEA. She had several years of experience in energy-related research, modeling, and analysis on the African continent. She was formerly part of McKinsey & Company Africa's Search and Insights team, where she was affiliated with the Global Energy, Power, and Natural Gas practice, wherein she conducted their Africa-related research projects. She has conducted research into various energy sector topics related to Africa, more specifically research on renewable energy, electric power, electrification, oil and gas sectors, and infrastructure. In South Africa, she has worked on projects for public and private sector clients in the energy space. She has a deep interest in the just energy transition, off-grid electrification, renewable energy and power sector regulation. To enhance her expertise, she's currently pursuing a master's in management in energy leadership at the Wits Business School. Thank you, Xolile. We are ready to hear your views on the topic.
Greetings to everyone, and thank you for having me. These opportunities are a bit rare, so thanks for having me. And the panel itself is quite experienced compared to me, so I'm quite excited to be here. So in terms of South Africa, like other countries in Africa, like a lot of countries in Africa, its electricity supply industry is vertically integrated, with the anchoring state-owned utility, Eskom, being the monopoly across the value chain, with private generation being allowed and distribution being shared with the municipal distributors, which is quite a unique model. Prior to the introduction of load shedding in 2007, which is the intentional interruption of electricity supply to reduce the load on the power system, Eskom had been able to meet the country's electricity demand needs. However, with the aging coal fleet, capital-intense generation expansion program, governance challenges, pressure to decrease their carbon emissions, and rising electricity tariffs as well, the government decided that the utility would be unbundled in order to open up the market further. This process is ongoing and is expected to be completed by the end of 2022. In terms of private sector electricity generation, it has been recognized as a key part of energy security in South Africa for a long time. In fact, since the Energy Policy White Paper was published in 1998. However, the implementation of the white paper took quite some time. The renewable energy sector took off after the introduction of the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program, otherwise known as the REAP, which is private sector generation in the country. And this was enabled by the publishing of the Integrated Resource Plan in 2010, which allocated around 17.8 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030 in South Africa. The program itself was highly successful. However, it was paused for a couple of years. So the progress of the program was stunted by the pause that eventually happened. But now it's back on track again. And due to this and continued challenges at Eskom, the electricity unreliability remains, and we're still struggling with load shedding still to date, about almost 14 years later. As the electricity unreliability continues and the electricity tariffs continue rising, these pose a challenge to all customer segments. So all residential, commercial, industrial customers are struggling with trying to remain on the grid and getting their energy regularly. So there has been a steady increase in embedded generation as it has become more of a viable solution for customers to meet the energy needs in the short term, as the renewable energy costs have come down, as mentioned by the other panelists. The embedded generation market has grown substantially over the past couple of years as Eskom has struggled with load shedding, and load shedding has kind of reached its highest levels over the past couple of years. I think 2020 was the most load shedding we've ever had. 2021 could beat that. The current market estimates for embedded generation in the market differ, as smaller systems were only really required to start registering with the National Energy Regulator in 2017. Estimates put the total installed capacity of embedded generation between 1.1 to 1.3 gigawatts. And this is primarily driven by the commercial and industrial segment, which represents about 70 to 75% of the market. Naturally, the technology that's predominantly used is rooftop solar PV. South Africa has an abundance of space. In terms of regulations and enabling regulations, in 2020, the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, Gwena Mantashe, amended what we call the Electricity Regulation Act to allow for an increase in the threshold for exemption from licensing for generation facilities to 1 megawatts. Previously, it was 100 kilowatts, which was quite low. However, many industry players found that this increase was still insufficient and made a call for this to be increased further. Some some saying it should be as high as 50 megawatts. Then surprisingly, in 2021, as Roula mentioned earlier, the president said that the threshold would be increased to 100 megawatts, which was quite a drastic and welcomed increase for industry. This is still under process of being gazetted and should be hopefully passed within the next couple of months. This was welcomed by a lot of the industry players, as many people see this as a key step to unlocking the growth of the embedded generation market in South Africa, as the licensing processes that were in place posed some challenges and faced at times significant delays. The government also included embedded generation under the distributed generation bucket in the latest IRP, dedicating about 500 megawatts per annum from 2023 until 2030. However, considering the pending increase of the licensing threshold to 100 megawatts and South Africa's continued electricity supply challenges, this seems rather insufficient. So potentially this could be further increased with the next iteration of the IRP. So the role for embedded generation into the South African market. So the IRP as well as Eskom estimated that the shortfall in the short term for South Africa's electricity generation needs lies between 2 to 3 gigawatts between 2019 and 2022, and several solutions were put on the table, such as the risk mitigated procurement program, and as well as just trying to follow through with what is in the IRP. And then one of the potential solutions is actually taking advantage of what is offered by the embedded generation market, because it has shorter lead times and is potentially easier to deploy. The CSIR estimated that approximately 3.4 gigawatts could be deployed in the short term with the right regulations and a build up in technical capacity and capabilities. The amendments to the ERA are a step in the right direction. However, more needs to be done. There are still some challenges to contend with to grow the market, such as a deficit in technical know-how to establish the generation facilities, lack of skilled labor and accredited installers to ensure quality and standards, lack of clarity around net metering and wheeling, and ensuring the technical integrity of the distribution grid as more embedded generation is added onto the system. Moreover, Eskom and the municipal distributors could potentially restructure the tariffs in such a way that would potentially make investing in embedded generation facilities less attractive, as currently the main component of the tariffs are the variable energy costs and not the fixed cost element. However, despite the challenges, the case for embedded generation remains clear, as even from the just energy transition perspective, more jobs can be garnered from embedded generation. And I think one of the attendees has asked this question, the utility scale on a full-time employee per megawatt basis. And according to the study published by SAPIA and CSIR in April 2021, the embedded generation market creates more than twice the number of FTE jobs per megawatt installed as compared to the utility scale market. This confirms the opportunity for increased job creation in the embedded generation market as coal-related jobs decrease. With all this in mind and economic challenges being faced by the country due to the energy supply constraints, which have in many ways constrained the economy, the opportunity for the market remains an exciting prospect indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very, very holistic picture of what's happening in South Africa from policy and technology to as Swetha earlier said, the willingness and the capacity of doing things and how things are progressing with regards to that. I think You also touched some of the topics that Ricardo and John earlier mentioned with regards to insecurities in the market and technology deficits that some developing countries face, and that's the reason it can be the reason why developing countries or global south countries are looking at embedded generation, but at the same time, they are the same reasons why the progress is not drastic. And you mentioned there was a question from the audience, so I will start opening to that now, about job creation potential. So I'm going to read the comment and see if any of the other panelists would also like to offer their thoughts. The participant would like to ask about the job creation potential difference between utility and embedded scales, and if other developing countries have seen high levels employment associated with high levels of localization. So the whole idea of the difference in job creation between embedded generation versus, for example, expansion of the grid and the more traditional way of distributing electricity and energy. So Xolile gave some thoughts and some work that the CSIR has done on that. Any of the other panelists would like to comment on this perspective of job creation when it comes to embedded generation?
Well, yeah, a brief comment.
Ricardo, yes.
If we think to install 100 megawatt of solar PV utility scale plant versus those 100 megawatt on rooftop, we will see a lot more jobs with the rooftop facility, because you will have to work in many roofs, each of them with its own peculiarities. So there's a big challenge, a lot more complex. If you are building just a utility scale, in general, everything is very standardized, and there are a lot of economies of scale. There is a report that's been made by Minnesota Utility Commission, a place that is credited to have the first net billing law back in 1983, that talks about that $1 million invested in utility scale PV plant versus $1 million invested in rooftop. The one in rooftop will create 30 times more jobs than the one in utility scale. So that gives, I think, an idea.
Thank you, Ricardo. John?
And if I look at in our space here in Nigeria, similar to what Ricardo is saying, we see the same thing, because if you look at large scale generation, it doesn't require as many people. Construction cost is much higher, obviously, and the capital cost is much higher. But if you look at the labor requirements in terms of operating it, it's quite limited. But in the off-grid space, the number of activities that are required is quite massive. Particularly if you look at natural gas, there's a logistics element to it, there's a construction element to it, and all that requires lots of labor intervention. So in terms of job creation, we see off-grid and embedded generation having much more impact than large-scale generation.
Thank you, George. Swetha?
Maybe just to add to what the two speakers mentioned, if you look at the case of India, definitely the DRE space is much more labor intensive. And a recent study done by one of the institutions locally says that literally the job market would double in 10 years from now. So we have about 1.6 million in the workforce looking at DRE, and they aim to have about 3.5. Of course, aiding this is also other policy on skill development, which is crucial, because just having any labor is no good. You need to have skilled labor. So that cross-cutting policy along with this is complementing the space.
Thank you very much. I'll take forward another question from the audience, and I will add a question that I was writing down while all of you were talking. So looking at the opportunity that the embedded generation provides to energy systems in the global south, we have all agreed that there are a number of benefits, and there is a willingness to go that side, but we should remind ourselves that we're talking about the system, and in systems, we have winners, we have losers. For every change, there's somebody that is gaining, there's somebody that is losing. So One of the typical, in inverted commas, losers from all of this might be considered the utilities in some of the countries. So from the audience, we have the question, how should incumbent utilities best respond to embedded generation to ensure that the utilities remain financially sustainable? And any of you, you're all more than welcome to share thoughts.
Well,
I'll make a comment on that. If you're quite right, and in the Nigerian context, DRE actually represents an existential threat to the utilities. And in our environment, they've been fighting the development of the off-grid space because particularly the off-grid operators are taking away their best customers in terms of the commercial and industrial customers are very, given the reliability issues, are migrated to off-grid. But this is where the government needs to step in. We need to take into consideration that in a regulated market like ours, the utility operators made huge investments, made huge capital investments with certain revenue expectation and cash flow expectation. With the proliferation of all these off-grid capacities, that revenue expectation is now in jeopardy. And I think the way to resolve this problem is that by integrating these DRE sources into a robust, comprehensive electricity supply system. I think there's a place, the grid, that there needs to be balanced. There's a contribution between the off-grid capacity and the grid, and also in being able to balance demand and supply across the economy. As it exists in my particular environment, most of the capacity right now exists in the grid space, in the off-grid space, but the ability to balance demand across the country would have to come from integration of off-grid capacity. So policies that enable that integration is a way to try and solve that issue.
Thank you, John. Ricardo also saw he had his mic off to give thoughts.
Well, let's think what happened with the telecom industry when mobile phones appear. That was a big game changer in the industry, and traditional telephone fixed line companies have to reinvent themselves, provide new services. So there was a big change, big transfers of value from traditional telecom to mobile companies, and I think there is this risk exists in terms of traditional distribution utilities or traditional power generators if they don't see an opportunity here. Some companies worldwide are taking eventually the lead on distributed generation, and they are the ones that are trying to manage this in terms of helping the transition. And there is a remaining question. If you get a lot of people that is connected to the grid today and they disconnect because they move 100% to distributed generation unconnected to the grid, you will have that fewer people will remain in the grid and will have to pay eventually higher price. So that creates a very bad vicious circle that put in a worse scenario even further traditional utilities. So I think the opportunity is to manage this, to look at the business opportunities that they are there, and there are many business opportunities for traditional utilities, and be part of the market, as was mentioned by John, in terms of creating this a more robust energy system.
Thank you. I'm going to take one last question and then see how time will go, because we are definitely past the hour. So I'm going to take a last question and then we can close the session. It's really a very broad topic with many perspectives. So Definitely just an hour of sharing is would never be enough. We knew that in advance. So there's a couple of questions more on the labor market and the jobs creation, but since we touched that a little bit and we touched the utilities, I'm going to go in another topic now. Embedded generation technologies generally rely a lot on imports, especially from China. Are there any interesting examples of localization of components in these countries? Is demand able to sustain these industries, or did they require further support? So the whole idea of countries in the global south going for embedded generation, but ending up having deficit in the budgets because they have to import the technologies to go for the embedded generation. So I'm going to hear your thoughts, and then we're going to close the session. Thank you. Yes, Swetha.
So, yeah, I can share the example from India. I think in the beginning, the country was gearing up to compete with China and setting up its own, say, solar manufacturing facilities if it were looking to compete there. But then, since there was not enough sort of support in terms of financing and setting up the manufacturing industry base here in India, and China having the ability to do things much quicker than most other countries, India clearly lost that race. And as a consequence of that is what I mentioned earlier in my intervention, which impacts our solar pricing today. So because we were dependent on cheap Chinese products, we could lower the tariff to a very substantial amount and compete more competitively in the market. But then when you had a ban or a limitation or a mandate from the government to use local products, which were not lucratively able to compete with the Chinese pricing, then it sort of impacted the sector. And as a consequence of that, there's still a fight to sort of reach a pricing that's suitable to take in both the local manufacturing and our dependence on China. But the same is the case also in terms of batteries. We are unfortunately or fortunately relying on the dependency on manufacturing from China, and it will take really a large coordinated effort to either focus on setting up a manufacturing base and compete on the products, or actually look at the generation itself. So it's about where you want to focus. And I think most countries have the obvious choices and that they've made.
Xolile?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I think for South Africa, we really had a missed opportunity in terms of localizing a lot of the, not a lot, but like a potentially a large chunk of what is needed for the renewable energies through the REAP program. So I think going forward, one of the things that we really have to try push is consistency in order to develop the localization and manufacturing and adjacent industries for renewable energy within the global south. So that's the only thing that I think is holding us back, is just that consistent growth in the renewable energy capacities in order to create the demand that's required to bring down those costs. Thank you.
Thank you. Ricardo also has a...
Yeah, just a comment. Yes, it's an issue, as was mentioned by Swetha Xolile regarding the manufacturing sector, but these products are made from some raw materials. So from where are those raw materials coming? And, for example, in the case of Chile, Chile is a big copper producer. It produces about 28% of the world copper. Also is second and has the largest reserve of lithium. So there is a big opportunities to creating value added there. Eventually, Chile will not be in a position to compete in the manufacturing itself, but certainly can create more value added in the raw materials and the products that are exported. And that is something that can be replicated in some other countries in the world that are rich in terms of the raw materials that are needed for this energy transition.
Thank you. John, you also had to add something, and then we'll close the session.
Yes, where we are in the Nigerian market is such that we cannot competitively manufacture these components at this time. There's been a number of incentives that the government have put in place to try to encourage localization. But to be candid, it is a situation where our industrial base is still low, and it's not something that aids in the short term. It will more be a medium to long term thing for Nigeria to get to that point. And we first of all have to fix our electricity market. Interestingly, lack of electricity is part of the reason why local manufacturing is not competitive. So, so it's sort of a chicken and egg issue for us. But ultimately, where we are in our development, we can't. Localization is not something in the short term that we can achieve.
Right. And at this point, I will thank all the panelists today. We really enjoyed the different perspectives you brought into the discussion, and it was interesting to hear similarities and differences. But I heard mostly similarities from the country, from the global south, with the challenges and the opportunities we are all facing. So thank you from my side, and thank you on behalf of the South African Association for Energy Economics. We hope to see you soon. David?
Thank you, Roula, and thank you to our distinguished panelists for really an enlightening discussion on electricity in the global south, as well as energy transition. You know, the topic of energy transition is such a hot topic now. IAEE developing a series of webinars on this topic, as well as a special issue of the Energy Forum, our quarterly newsletter as well. We look forward to your submissions. On behalf of IAEE, again, we thank SAEE for this webinar, and we wish you a good rest of your day, morning, evening, whatever it is on where you are located on our globe. Take care. Bye now.